In lesson number 1, we're going to be talking all about importing and managing your database. And what that means is really taking Wild Apricot and preparing it to house all the information that you have for those contacts and members that are already in your organization. So to give you an idea of the agenda for today's lesson, we're going to be talking about what Wild Apricot considers a contact and a member. In the system, there are contacts, there are members. They play out a little bit differently and they have slightly different permissions. So we'll talk all about what you can do with membership and why it's slightly better than what Wild Apricot has for contacts, which are still useful, but different. We're also going to talk about how you can prepare things like your membership application form. That's in preparing the types of fields that you may want to collect for your data. So whether that's drop-down options that you provide to your potential applicants or whether you're collecting just text fields from them. We're going to talk about all of that stuff, plus the privacy options that you actually have within the system for that data. And they're pretty cool. You can actually set them in advance for your members or allow them to adjust them after the fact. So we'll take a look at all of that stuff. And we're also going to look at the different types of membership in Wild Apricot. Wild Apricot's unique in that it actually has an individual type of membership and then a bundle option, which is super useful for families, corporations or groups, or any situation where one person may pay an invoice or otherwise manage a group of users. So we'll talk about that and I'll show you how you can set those up. And then in part 2, we're going to talk about how to prepare any data that you do have already so that it can go into Wild Apricot and live in all these places that you've created for it to live in the new database. We're also going to show you an example of how the actual import looks. And spoiler, it's really not that difficult. It's pretty simple. And if you've prepared things in advance, everything will go quite swimmingly. So I'll show you exactly what that looks like, as well as what it looks like if something goes wrong. I always feel that's important to put in these tutorial courses. So we'll take a look at what it looks like if everything goes upside down and you have to start from scratch. Again, really not that difficult and not that uncommon either, so don't worry too much. And I also did want to touch on what you can and cannot import into Wild Apricot. There are a couple of things that this system is not really meant to take. That's things like historic event invitations for your users. It's really the sort of thing that's set up to work for the future, but it may not be able to take their old registrations from years ago, just the information that it'll need to use for tomorrow. So first things first, because this is lesson 1, I did want to mention that if you are unaware of how to log into your Wild Apricot admin account, you actually might have got an email when you registered with the URL itself. When you opened a Wild Apricot account, we gave you a new website address that you can use to build your site. And that was something that may have been in the email that you got, but if it wasn't, or if you're having trouble finding it, you can always go to wildapricot.com and then log in with the email and password you used to sign up, or otherwise that you used to log into your admin account. And if you have more than one account, it'll actually list them, so you can select the one that you do belong to or the one that you're trying to log in at the time, but that'll be the best way in case you get lost. First things first, the way that Wild Apricot is set up is that everybody that you put in the system, that's every single unique email address or otherwise unique user that you put in the system, is considered first and foremost a contact. Now I know that some of those people may be members, or that you may want them to be members, but in our system, in Wild Apricot, everybody's considered a contact because a contact record can be a member, but it can also be an event registrant, it can be a donor, it can be an email subscriber. So in Wild Apricot, everybody's a contact. Some people are members, and all of your members are going to be contacts, but not all contacts are necessarily members. And why that comes into play and why that's important is because you can give additional privileges and permissions to those people who are members. Same way that somebody who is an event registrant might have a reminder email for that event. Members can have additional privileges like being able to access the member-only pages that you define. They can also do things like appear in the member directory. They can take advantage of discounts on event registrations or in the store. And you can also organize them on the back end into member groups. I mentioned a little earlier that there are 2 ways you can set up membership on Wild Apricot. There are the individual memberships, so that's if you or I were joining and we were just a solo member of an organization. As an example, $100 a year, one member, whether I pay that per year or every 3 months, every 6 months, or even monthly, all of those options exist. The other one that I wanted to touch on more so is the bundle membership that exists in Wild Apricot. Because what that enables is for one person can add or remove people to that bundle membership. So that means that the people that they add don't also get a $100 invoice, but they are otherwise individuals in the membership database. They can log in, they can register independently to events, make independent store purchases, stuff like that. So it ends up being really useful for places like family memberships where two people may share one type of membership, but they don't necessarily both share the same registrations to things. Or it can also be useful on corporate memberships where an organization may be the member, and that way you use kind of a central email address for the organization, like, I don't know, their HR or whoever pays the bills over there. And then they can add all of the seats underneath them to all of their users. And you can limit the amount of people in that bundle too, whether it's 1, 5, or unlimited, that's all up to you. I mentioned membership levels a few times. Those are basically the different types of membership or subscriptions that you offer. Bronze, silver, gold is a good example. Maybe you have different permissions for bronze members, but silver members get access to a few different things and it's a little bit more money. Basically, you can set up as many different options that you need in Wild Apricot, and they have all of the options for privacy and different emails that I mentioned earlier. You'll be able to customize the name, the cost, the renewal date, and all of those welcome emails too. So we're going to take a look in the program in just a moment at what that looks like. But first, I did want to show you that if you're downloading a handout, and you'll see those associated with all of the bootcamp lessons here, if you're downloading the handout for this lesson, you'll see links to different items that I've mentioned here. These are things that I think are very important in our help site. So it's a good way to get familiarized with the help site, but also if you want Coach Mark's curated recommendations, these are them. So if you like, you can pause here and you can do these membership related, check out these help site related options and then move forward. But otherwise, let's take a look in the program itself. So when you get into Wild Apricot itself, it's going to look a little something like this, especially if it's a brand new account. This is your dashboard, you're in the overview section, and for the purposes of this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to head over to Members in the left-hand side menu, and then we're going to go to Levels. Now here we have a couple of sample memberships. You don't have to use these ones. I actually get this question a lot, but they're here because we didn't want you to just walk into a completely blank account. We wanted to show you what it's like when you have something set up. But you're meant to delete these, and I'll show you how to do those after. But what we'll do is for now, we'll go to Add Level in the top left. And here is where you can start defining your membership levels. So they'll be a little different for everybody. I'm going to stick to the examples I was giving earlier with bronze, silver, and gold. And this one, we can either make it an individual level or we can make it a bundle membership. The individual is relatively straightforward. In this case, we'll just make it a one-to-one membership. So if somebody joins, they'll be a gold member. In this case, they'll get it for $100. And we can choose to apply tax settings. And that's something that I'll show you how to set up a little bit later. But if you have automatic taxes, this is very, very useful. And of course, once you set up online payments, you'll be able to enable those here. But for now, I guess we'll leave them not enabled. And these options on the right, public can apply, means that this will show up on the application form. So if this is not selected, then this kind of level, this gold level, won't show up on the application form. You would use that potentially for a hidden membership level, or maybe you have like a lifetime retirement level that people graduate into it automatically, and you don't need people to apply to it. You as an administrator will just adjust people later in your free time. But when it comes to the automatic way, and if you do want people to be able to apply, in the middle of the night, 3 a.m, then you would want it on your application form. So you would want public can apply for most cases. Member can change to is what I was talking about for people upgrading and downgrading their membership. So in their user profile, when your members actually log into their profile later, they'll have the option to upgrade to or downgrade to any of the options that you check here. So maybe one of them's, we have the premium one, which is more expensive. We have the regular one, which may be a little less expensive. And when you're done here, you're going to want to go to the next available tab, which is Renewal Policy. Now here is where all the magic happens, and it's actually going to be really neat. But first, let's talk quickly about the renewal period. So the options you have available in Wild Apricot are Never, which it doesn't suggest it actually, but it is actually used for your lifetime memberships. So if anybody's a member in perpetuity or they don't ever have a renewal date, then Never would be the option you would select for them. Those are your lifetime persons. Down here, monthly, straightforward. Quarterly is every 3 months, twice a year, every 6 months, and every 1 year, up to 6 years, actually, as far as you can make it up between 1 and 6 years. But every year, for example, you can set it for either the join date that person joined the organization, such as if I joined on October 17th, then my renewal would be October 17th. Or you can make it a specific date, like the 1st of the month, or any particular month, or the 15th of another month. Over here, you can also limit the period to which they're allowed to renew in advance. You can also limit it so that they can only renew within a particular period of time. So if you, and again, everybody's situation is a little bit different, but if you need to have different policies based on somebody should only be able to renew 10 days in advance for some reason, or months, you can set those here. But when I was talking about the magic of Wild Apricot, I was talking about this part, the renewal reminders and actions. Because here is where you can set up all the automation so that hopefully you never really have to do very much ever again. So down here is where you set what happens, for example, 14 days before somebody's renewal date. And you can adjust this date too. So if you need it to be 25 days, that's fine. And what you're going to want to do is tick these boxes, because generating an invoice and changing their status to pending renewal means that the system is going to send or generate an invoice for that user for $1,000, and it's going to automatically email it to them. So you don't really have to do anything. In that email, they'll be able to click through and pay the invoice and be a member for another year or month or whatever it is. And you're going to be able to set that all up here too by customizing all of these email options. Basically, anywhere you see a blue link is an email that you can customize. And I'll show you what one of those looks like in just a moment, but let's go through all of these options first. So when you'll want to generate an invoice so that the system has an invoice on the back end. That's how it knows that there's an outstanding charge. That's how it knows how to reconcile the charge. And that's what Wild Apricot does best. You're also going to want to email that invoice more than likely to your member. It's polite generally to email invoices to folks. You can also customize and send a renewal reminder email. So if that wants to be, or if you want to send something that's a little bit separate to a clinical style of invoice that just has dollars and cents on it, and you want to send a, hey, don't forget to renew to our organization. We value your membership so much. You can customize it as needed. You can set that here too. You can send that to the bundle member, to the bundle administrator, or to the organization contact for the organization itself. Down here, you can send another renewal reminder. So 7 days before, let's send maybe a slightly more urgent reminder. Don't forget that you have to renew soon. You can also set what happens on the renewal date. And of course, you don't have to set all of these too. If you don't want another email to go out at all, maybe just the first one, you don't have to enable these other options. But otherwise, you can have them all set. You also set what happens if somebody doesn't renew. So if they haven't responded to their renewal invoice and they're about 7 days overdue to my organization, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to downgrade their membership level automatically. Oh, I don't have the option, but you could set it here. So maybe you have a membership level, overdue, something like that. You can also send a grace period email if you want to ask them nicely not to forget to pay. And then you also have one more last chance here for automation to either, to do all of the final sorts of tasks, the finite stuff, like voiding the invoice, changing that renewal status to lapsed, so they're no longer pending renewal, they're just all the way lapsed. You can change the membership level again. You can go and outright suspend it so that they would lose access to their login and to the ability to access members-only pages. Or you can go all the way and just archive the record so that they're no longer in the system at all for most intents and purposes. You can always restore them from the archive, but they're basically, at that point, collecting dust. And of course, you can edit that email as well. Now, right here at the bottom, before we take a look at what editing one of those emails look like, I just want you to see that you can also send a renewal pending email to, after the renewal was initiated and pending is required. So somebody starts the renewal process but doesn't finish the renewal process, you can customize that particular email here too. And you can also customize the email that people will get once the payment actually goes through, especially after a recurring payment might be done. And going back up to the top, I'll just go over to the last tab for new applications. This is what's going to happen for new members. So not necessarily people who are renewing, but people who are brand new Gold membership members. Here, we can do things like automatically prorate their fees. This is calculated based or to the day. So if you want, you can prorate their fees so that whether it's a monthly or a to the day sort of membership, they can pay the precise amount for the access that they're actually going to get. Likewise, you can do things like charge the full fee, but also extend the amount of renewal in the future if that's a better option for what you have in mind. Down here, you can set whether membership applications have to be approved by an administrator. So if this is checked, then people who apply will show up in the member summary that we saw a little bit earlier, but they'll show up to administrators as people who are pending approval, and then they'll have to be authorized manually. And likewise, for that process, you can make it so that payment has to be received in full before membership is activated. So you can make you can unselect these if you want people to be able to join without approval, or if you want people to join but also generate an invoice that they might be able to pay by check, and they may not have to pay on the spot with an online payment, for example, or you can check them depending on how you operate. You also have another chance to customize an initiation email when somebody starts an application but doesn't necessarily finish it. And you can also send what happens to a new bundle member when they do activate their new bundle membership. So maybe it has specific instructions on how they can add or remove users. That's up to you. Maybe it can just be a custom welcome. Oh, and lastly, the bundle member. Don't forget about that. So when somebody gets added to a bundle, they can also get a customized email. So let's go ahead and take a look at what one of those customized emails look like. We'll just take this one, although the editor for all of them is actually the same. So this is the bundle member activation email. This is what will be sent to somebody when they are added as a new bundle member. If I want to edit it, I'll go up here to the top and I'll click the edit button. And down here, you're going to see the interface for editing one of these emails. First, you have the subject. So this is the actual subject for the email itself. We can say, "Congratulations, you're a new member of organization name." Now these curly brackets, these are pretty neat. These are macros in the system. And you can see the button up here in the top right. When you insert a macro, it's going to take personalized data for the person who's receiving the email. So they might see, "Dear first name, dear Coach Mark, here is your email," something like that. "Your email on file," and then we'll have the contact email macro. So when somebody actually receives that, it's going to say, "Dear Coach Mark, your email on file. You've been registered as a new bundle." And you can customize this as much as you like. You can actually even, you see the top toolbar here. You can edit it basically the same way as you would with any other word processor. So we can do things like justify it to the center. We can change the bolding on certain things. We can make text larger. And you see all of the options up here too. There are also many color options. You can insert logos for your organization if you have some, for example. The image button up here. There's the Wild Apricot. Default logo. That actually looks not so bad. And if you're happy with your email, when you're happy with your email, you go ahead and click Save. And that's the one that people are going to get when they're new bundle members. It's actually kind of whimsical. I don't mind that. Pretty good. There's another button here, Send Test Email. If you click that, it's going to send a test email with just some random data to the administrator. And sometimes this reflects your actual data that you have in the system. Sometimes it doesn't. That is just because it's mostly meant as test data to show you how the email formatting will work. So don't worry if you see in that screen that it doesn't necessarily reflect what you have in members and levels. But I think we're all set up here actually. So let's click Save. And now we have our new Gold membership. And that was pretty easy. So I'm going to go and just rate that a 7 without thinking very much about it. But the gold membership up here, now we can see that it's a bundle membership. It'll add up to 8 members in that bundle. The renewal period is every 1 year, starting from January 1st. It's $1,000. It doesn't yet have recurring payments, although I'll turn those on later, and the public can apply. So what you want to do is you'll want to make one of these for every type of membership that you do have. That way, you can bring in all the data that you do have for your existing members, or new people can join to these existing options. So let's just go back to the slides for a moment. I want to talk quickly about that data, about the types of things that you can present as options to your members and how they're actually going to enter them into your system, or how you may enter them if you have them already. So in Wild Apricot, there are basically 2 types of fields. There are common fields, which are things that are used everywhere on the site. That's anywhere that you have a form, anywhere that somebody's going to be entering data, or any way that's basically associated with the contact record. So generally, and they're actually pre-built for you, but you'll generally want things like first name, last name, email, maybe phone number, maybe address, things that you would ask somebody even if they were purchasing something from your online store, for example. So maybe not address, depends. You also have in Wild Apricot, before I go, so these common fields, they will show up on your membership application form. So they'll show up actually at the very start. They'll be the first stage of the membership application form, just like they'll be the first stage of the event registration form. They're things that you need to collect to stay in touch with that user, so consequently they're common to everything on Wild Apricot. The member fields or other specialty fields are basically the additional layer of information that you can put on top of the common fields on Wild Apricot. So when you're doing something like member fields, this is where you would ask questions that only really apply to those people who are members or attending an event at the organization or a particular membership type. So this is where you may ask what somebody's preferences are for colors or their dining options for events. This is where you may ask for things like membership certification, because you can do things like get them to attach files to their application, and you don't really need people who are just purchasing something from the store to do that. You need your members to do that. Another fun thing you can do with the member fields is set up or additional cost items. So that's basically add-on items for your membership application. If it's $1,000 for a gold membership, but then there's an additional VIP package for $500, you can set that up here in the members fields. So basically anything you would ask your applicants that you want to use as data later on. Maybe you want to use this for places like the membership directory, where you can actually search through members based on the data that you've been collecting all this time. Or maybe you want it to appear in somebody's profile or on the membership application so you can get it there and then use it in things like personalized emails. And we'll go into the program itself to show you what it looks like, but just to give you an example here really quickly, this is what it's going to look like when you're looking at your contacts and common fields. They're all going to be in a list like this. All of those items on the left where it says user ID, first name, last name, those are the individual different field types that you have in the system. And then all these little icons over there, there's a legend at the top, but they all mean different things that you can set individually for that particular field. This is just giving you a summary of what they're going to look like. We'll go into the program and show you what that looks like in just a second, but I did want to mention, I did want to talk about this word field. So I keep saying it and I keep mentioning how it relates to the questions that you'd be asking your applicants. So basically fields are how Wild Apricot stores the information in the database. There are a bunch of different field types in Wild Apricot. That's how you collect the data on things like application forms and how it's stored in the system in places like somebody's profile so that you can access it as an admin later. They can also access it, but the different field types basically give you different ways to organize it. And there's a whole bunch of different selections here. Some of them are those extra cost options that I mentioned earlier. Some of them are things like multiple choice or radio buttons that let people select one of a few options. We'll show you what some of these look like later, but I just wanted to give you an idea that there are a whole bunch of different ways that you can do things like present information on an application form so that you can get it in the way that you want. If you want somebody to make sure that they spell a place like Cincinnati or Minnesota properly, then maybe you can offer in a drop-down list for them so that they can't, so that they don't have to just spell it by themselves and risk the data not being standardized on your end. In the handout for this lesson are a couple of links that I think are pretty important for setting up your membership levels. You have all about member levels and how to add them manually as an admin, but you also have the membership setup checklist, which I really think is a very important resource, and it's really useful, and you can't really go wrong if you follow it top to bottom. So that's my number one recommendation, and they're all included on the handout. But let's go into the program itself and take a look at what it's like to add a couple of database fields. So to do this, let's go over to Contacts and then Common Fields. You'll notice a couple of these are presented for you, and that a number of them are system fields, indicated up here in the legend. With the little wrench icon, you can see them on things like user ID, first name, last name, organization, email, and phone number. And the reason is, these fields are used in Wild Apricot to do things like display somebody's profile properly. So although you can rename them, you won't really be able to reuse them for a different purpose. Email, for example, is how somebody logs into the system, both your members and you, the admin. So you won't be able to change it. It's the way Wild Apricot works, but I wanted to give you an idea of why they're there. You'll be able to add new ones if you like those, so that's done with either this button at the bottom or the top here. And it's in two places in case your list gets really long and you don't want to have to scroll, but let's click Add New Field. First thing, it's going to say New Field. Well, that's because we haven't given our field a name yet. So let's call this something like New Membership Name, Nickname. We want this field here so that when people join the organization, we want them to set their new nickname. It's a very informal organization that we have over here. You may be a little different, but this is just for mine. Now up here is where you can set the field type itself. Now you have the text field that I mentioned earlier. That'll just be the same as this, just a one line of text. You have a multi-line text rather. That basically looks like this box down here in field instructions. It's more than one line. People can fill out a whole paragraph. You have multiple choice, and that's actually evidenced down here over at the options for this field. You see that I can select more than one, or just one if needed. That's what a multiple choice field is like. Radio buttons are the same as these field options up here, these circle buttons. I'm only able to select one of multiple options. That's what radio buttons are. Drop down, that's kind of like this one here, where you have a bunch of options in a list that people can click. Picture, this is something that people will just be able to upload. So instead of an option that they fill in, there'll be a little button there where they can select a file on their computer and send it over and upload it as the picture. So it's pretty neat stuff. And down here, there's an avatar field. This is used for places like the membership directory or places that you have somebody's photo. So it's a good way to show off your members and have them upload a picture of themselves. File attachment, this kind of field will allow people to attach a file. So if you need them to attach waivers or certifications or things like that, this is a good place to do it. It'll, again, not ask them to fill anything in, but it will ask them to attach something. So if you need to provide the waiver in advance, it may be a good idea to put that on your website somewhere, maybe on the same page as your application page. We'll deal more with that in the lesson dealing with website design, but for now, we'll just move on. Rules and terms. This is like a little checkbox field that people have, or a checkbox that people have to select to indicate that they've read over something before joining the site. So you'll be able to attach your particular rules and terms here, and you can do that by, if you have a PDF or a file with the rules and terms, you can link directly to it by inserting a link here. And then having people or requiring people to check it before they actually go forward. And then the other fields you can select or make a date box so that they have to select one date. And section divider. This one's pretty neat because it just breaks up the application form. So you could do something like part 2, for example, and then they'll have this first part, then there'll be a little bit of a break with a line in it, and then it'll have this part in part 2. So pretty neat stuff. Now, I mentioned before that there are two places you can add fields. These are the common database fields. So these are going to apply to people who are applying for membership or events or donating. But we can also do the same for our membership fields. And that's done over here in members and then membership fields. Now, these questions only appear on membership application forms and are only going to be in places like members profiles, not for your event registrants, but your members. If a member is also an event registrant, that's fine, but they'll have to be a member at least. But here's where we can do things like add another field. You'll have all the same options as before, plus some new ones here for those extra charges. But here's where we can do things like add more personal questions like, favorite color. How about that? Something we only want to ask our members. Anyway, we can select the type for that field, and the fancier options we have here in membership fields versus the common fields are things like member access. So here are where we can set what happens, or where somebody can actually edit this field information. So if we want, we can make it so that it's something that's only going to show up in their profile and not on the application form. Maybe we need to reduce the size of our application form, for example. Or we can do the opposite, where it's going to be only, well, we have to select one of them. In this case, it'll be only on the application form, but then won't show up in the profile. So if you need to collect data from people and you don't want them changing it later, this is an option you can do as well. Member access is basically where they're going to be able to access that information. Even after they've already filled it out, where will they be able to see it? You can make it so that that member can only view it as well. Again, if it's an application information, like you had them fill out a waiver or something like that, you don't want them to change it, you can make it view only. And likewise, the other option is to make it for internal use only, so only the admins can see it. If you have it so that it shows up in their profile, you can also set the privacy option for this field. So you can set where it's going to be accessible, whether it's not accessible to anybody at all but the member and the admins, or if it's something that would potentially show up to other members in something like the directory. Anybody is basically the public option. If you make it so that others access as anybody, then any public member who visits the site who would potentially see something like this where you displayed it in a directory or on a page, they'd be able to see it. So if you do need to protect your members' privacy, members is a good option, but it's up to you. And the other option you can do is to use this in specific types of membership. So you can either have this particular field, this favorite color field, apply in all levels or just to a couple. So maybe we only want it to apply to our gold membership. The last thing to take a look at are these extra charge options. So this is where you can do things like add-ons to the organization. So let's check this one. Actually, let's do this one, for example. Multiple choice with extra charge. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this an application fee. So when somebody does join my organization, this is application initiation fee. Sorry, that's actually what I was trying to portray properly. Initiation fee. There we go. So we're going to make it an initiation fee. It's going to be required. It's going to be an additional $50 processing fee for joining for the very first time. It's going to be selected by default. And over here, new choice, we're going to title it first time fee. $50. It's selected by default. It's required, so they can't go forward without selecting it. And down here, we can make it so that it's included in new applications. We can either prorate it or not, but we can select whether or not it's going to be included in renewals too. So if this wasn't a first-time fee, maybe we would want it to appear every year or every month. But right now, for an initiation fee, I'm going to not select it for renewals, and that will set it. And it's also going to be just for the gold membership. So when you're ready with all of your fields, and you can add more than one too, you can go all the way down the list and add as many as you like. You're going to want to do this before importing your data, because when you select things, I just have to retitle this because it doesn't like having everything titled new field. But when you select, or when you create your fields, when you select all of the privacy options and set them for that actual data, it means that the information that you bring into Wild Apricot will get that privacy stuff automatically applied. You can always change it later, but if you want to do everything right the first time, then the best thing you can do, just like the membership setup checklist suggests, is to follow or to create your membership fields ahead of time. So we'll save our changes here. And now we can see that we have a couple of fields here. We have the initiation field, we have new field and new field G. We don't need this one anymore. That was a mistake, so we'll delete it. Likewise with new field, we don't need that one. So I'll select it, and up here in the top right, delete. We'll save that again, and that'll be that. Going back to the slides, we saw a little bit of this already, but I did want to mention that you can set all of the member privacy options from the administrator level. And the other cool thing is your members can actually set these individually as well. When they log into their profile, they'll have full access to change as much of this as you allow for them. So it's pretty neat stuff, and it does make sure that you can adhere to things like GDPR and other anti-spam regulations where people can control their own data. So you can take a look at that later. And we'll look at this in the system, but you can see an example of how you can really fine-tune the privacy options for the system. In the handout, I included a couple links to these privacy options because I do think they're useful and I do think they're valuable. And some organizations especially consider privacy more than others, so do take a look there. But in the program itself, I'm going to show you where you can adjust these membership privacy options from an administrator's perspective on a macroscopic scale. So what you'll want to do is head over on the left to Settings, click the Settings option, and then go here to Members and then Privacy. Here gives you a general summary of all of the privacy options you do have in the system already. On the left, it'll show you all of the fields that you do have, things like your username and last name, email, phone, avatar. And then over here, it'll show you what their existing privacy option is. So if it's anybody, they'll be in this column. If it's members, they'll be in this one. And if it's no access but to the admin and the member, then it'll be in this one. If we want to edit it, we'll go to Edit. We can do things like change the email so that the email address is not accessible to anybody. It's just accessible to other members. And we can even lock that change too, because we don't want our members potentially changing it. We want it to stay like that. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and save. Here, you're going to be asked whether or not you want to apply this new privacy setting to all of your records, including people who may have changed it already in the past, or if you want to leave those existing records alone and just have it apply to people in the future. Here, I'm trying to correct a change from before, so I'm going to have it apply to all records. For confirmation, the system asks that you type reapply. And you can set this for all of your privacy options, and it's always something that can be done later on after the fact if you do need to correct something or adjust it from an admin's perspective. But it'll be here in Settings and then Privacy. Lastly, before we get to the import itself, I wanted to show off the group functionality of Wild Apricot. Now, groups are something that's slightly different to membership levels because they apply beyond membership levels. They're basically another layer on top. And how that works is that people of different membership types, different membership levels, can all potentially be a member of the same group. So all of your gold members plus all of your premium members can potentially be members of a volunteer crew or your board members or something like that. And that way you can have another layer of options to provide people for their access to different pages or email lists, stuff like that. So it's pretty useful stuff. One thing to note is that they do have to be members in your database. They can't be contacts. You can't make groups out of contacts. They have to be a membership type, one of the membership level options that you offer. But they can be of any of those membership levels that you do offer there. I mentioned a little bit before, but groups are super useful because they can be set to receive specific email blasts. You can give them restricted access to pages and files on the system. And you can also limit some permissions on things like blogs and discussion forums based on member groups so that you can make it that only certain types of members have access to post or reply to those sorts of things. On the handout are a couple of links to how groups work on Wild Apricot. There's also another link on the help site page about how to import people to membership groups. We'll talk a little bit about that in the importing part in part 2, but if you do have people as part of existing groups in data that you are importing to Wild Apricot, you'll want to check out that particular page on the help site too. To show you what this looks like in the program, you'll want to go to Members and then Groups. Here we have one as an example, again, because we didn't want you to walk into an empty room, but here we have a board member group as an example group that you can have in the system. I'm going to add another one by clicking Add New Group. I'll fill in details for my group, Boot Camp Group. This is the group for the boot camp. And I'll click Save. It's actually that easy to create a new group. So now we have two. We have the board members and the boot camp group. If I want to add or remove people to those groups, I'll click this button, Manage Participants. Here, I can select from my available groups, such as the boot camp group. We can see that there is nobody in that group right now, but we can add a couple members to that group. So both John and Jane, I'm going to select them. I'm going to click Add to Group. And now they're a member of the bootcamp group. I'll save my changes, and you can see that there are 2 participants here now. This is pretty handy stuff because this little button, this to button, if I click it, it'll show those members of the group. I can find them easily, or more importantly, I can email them quite easily because there's a button right up here. So it's pretty neat stuff. And as I said, you can always use these groups later to restrict content to those types of members. But we'll talk more about that in the particular lesson for the website design. In part 2, we're going to cover the importing process so that your data can actually get into Wild Apricot. We're going to cover a couple of things, namely how you can prepare the data that you do have so that it'll go into the system as easily and quickly as possible, and that you don't have to do it multiple times. We'll also go through some troubleshooting efforts and the importing process itself, how you can assign the right field types and make sure that your members actually come into the system with the existing membership that they have, so that no data is lost along the way. And like I said, I'll show you how you can start over if needed. Now, there are a few things that you will want to note before you actually get started. Number 1, don't be afraid to import your contacts. First things first, email is disabled on your account when you first open it. That's just a safety net. We don't want you to accidentally email somebody if they're not expecting it. So you don't have to be worried about that. You can definitely import people into the system. And number 2, there is a delete button. It's actually in Dashboard Account. So if you make a mistake, don't worry, you can start over. In the future, you'll be able to edit records in bulk. So even though this is your first import and you're just preparing things for now, in the future, you'll be able to make changes. And of course, the system's going to try and help you to make sure that information goes to the right place. That's what the import wizard does, and I'm going to show you what that looks like so that you're familiar with it when you do it yourself. But of course, you'll be able to review any errors and any other changes that have happened on the account, and you'll have a pretty good idea of just how effective your import was. Now, the number 1 thing you can do to prepare is to merge all of your data into one spreadsheet. Wild Apricot can only really import information from one spreadsheet at a time. So if you have multiple sheets on your actual spreadsheet software, like sheet 1, 2, and 3, you're going to want to merge all of that data into one single sheet. And if you do have your information on some other solution or system, the thing you're going to want to do is export that so that you can work with it in a spreadsheet, most likely in something like a CSV file format or an XLS Excel file format. And then you'll be able to prepare it so that it can go into Wild Apricot. And you'll only be able to insert that one spreadsheet at a time. So if you do have multiple groups of members, that's perfectly fine. You'll just have to do them one at a time rather than do them all at once. The other thing you can do is to standardize all of the date formats in your spreadsheet. Now you can set the standard for Wild Apricot. That's something you do in Dashboard and then Organization. But just make sure that all the other date formats in your spreadsheet match what Wild Apricot's expecting. There's a really easy way that you can actually prepare yourself for the import of information to Wild Apricot, and that's by exporting information that's already in the system. It's a little counterintuitive, but what it does is it gives you a template with which you can insert your information so that it fits right in. I'll show you exactly how to do that, as well as so you can familiarize yourself with the export process. Head into your account and then to Contacts and then List. In here, you'll find a button near the top of your screen for Export. In the future, this will be very useful for being able to get particular data out of Wild Apricot. For example, if you need something for reporting purposes, you can access things like the contact fields, the membership fields, as well as any system fields, and the custom fields that you may have added into the system. For now, let's continue to export all of the fields. We'll leave that checked, and I'll click Export. What this will do is give you a spreadsheet of all of the data you have in Wild Apricot, including any custom and system fields that are existent. You can see things like first name, last name, email, as well as some custom things in the back end, like group participation, the custom fields you've added, whether they're archived, and more importantly, the fields that the system is looking for with regards to whether or not somebody is a member. Those being the membership enabled, membership level, membership status, member since, and renewal due fields. These 5 are very important if you do want to import existing members. For now, what you can do is insert your own information into this existing template. For example, if I wanted to add myself, I can start filling that information out and then import this into Wild Apricot. The reason being, it knows what to do with all of these fields already. If you have a full list already of your members, you can try and fit it so that it does fit into this template and then just copy and paste it. Again, if you already have an existing list, the 5 most important fields will be these ones. In the handout for this lesson, you'll find links to all of the most important help site articles about importing your data. The one I think is personally the most useful is the import checklist. When coupled with the membership setup checklist, you really can't go wrong. All of these links are included in the handout. When it comes time to import your information, we can either follow the import checklist that's linked in the handout, or we can follow these 5 steps. Step 1. Only use one sheet on your spreadsheet. Many spreadsheets often open with multiple sheet options, but you really only need one to import your data to Wild Apricot. Try and delete the others and make sure that all of your information is in the same sheet. Step 2. Remove any extra rows you have at the beginning of your spreadsheet. The very first row in your spreadsheet should be the column header. That way, the information at the top matches the information that's reflected down the rest of your spreadsheet. If you've been following the membership setup checklist from before and preparing your Wild Apricot database for this information, then you've probably already made a number of common fields and membership fields for the information that you'd like to import. You want to make sure that your column headers match the same spelling and date and any other standardized format that you have in those fields you've already created. If they match exactly, the system will know exactly where to put the information. Step 4 is general housekeeping. We want to make sure that date formats are standardized, that there are no extra spaces anywhere, and that all of our cell contents are formatted as best as we can so that they're standardized to go into the system. Many organizations will likely have their own unique data that they've been collecting, and that's perfectly fine. By creating common fields and membership fields, you're creating a place on Wild Apricot for that data to be housed. And that's perfectly fine to do in the import process as well. As long as it matches what's expected in your common fields or membership fields, the data will be able to be imported. And don't worry about this particular example because every spreadsheet looks a little bit different. Just be concerned about standardizing your formats and making sure that everything looks ready to go. Usually the biggest concern is just removing extra spaces. So if you're familiar with spreadsheet programs, the Find and Replace tool can really cut down the amount of time it may take to fix your spreadsheet. Step 5 is to step through the built-in importing wizard on Wild Apricot. When you're in there and when you do select a file to be imported, you'll see that the import wizard breaks it down into multiple columns so that you can see examples of the data that you're bringing in, as well as where it will be put once it's brought into Wild Apricot. You'll see the column header, as well as example data from your spreadsheet, a checkbox to indicate whether or not it should be imported into the system, and then the action item where it's mapped to on Wild Apricot. The next screen will show you a summary of your import, including any errors that may have popped up. And don't worry, you can start over if needed by heading to Dashboard and Account. There's a button in there to delete all of your existing contacts. Here I have a spreadsheet of data that I'm ready to bring into Wild Apricot. I have all of the fields I'll need to bring in my membership information, as well as one I'll need if I have bundle members, and all of the custom data that I'm going to bring into Wild Apricot. When we're ready, we can head to Wild Apricot, Contacts, and then Import. From here, we can choose the import file. Then we can click Upload. And the very first step will be asking if the first row of that spreadsheet was a header. And in most cases it's going to be, and we'll click Next. Here you have the mapping process itself. On the left are column headers as well as the information that you had in your spreadsheet. First name, last name, email, etc. You also have examples of the information that was in that column so that you can confirm what was there and where it's supposed to go. In the middle is an import button. This signifies whether or not Wild Apricot should import this information. On the right, where it says Map To, is a drop-down of all the fields on Wild Apricot, both the ones you've created as well as the system fields where you can store information. If you've prepared correctly, in most cases Wild Apricot will know exactly what to do with this information, such as with first name, last name, email, membership enabled, the membership level, where we have an option to either ignore values in the spreadsheet that don't already exist in Wild Apricot or add them on the fly. We can also scroll down the list to see all of the other places where the information will be inserted, and I recommend doing this slowly so that you can confirm that places like renewal date information will go to the right place on Wild Apricot. It's a system field, so you don't have to create a new one. In that case, make sure it's going to renewal due. Scrolling down the list, we have a bunch of empty columns and they don't need to be imported into the system, so we'll leave them unchecked. Now I'll click Next. We can make a note about this import session. And we can finalize the process. When it's finished, we'll see a summary of the import, the date, the file, and notes that we made for the import itself, as well as all of the records that were processed and any new members that were created. We can click on this to see all of those new members. There are a number of fields which are built into Wild Apricot and don't need to be created specifically by you. You just need to map your existing data to those fields. You can see a full list here, but I wanted to give you some examples of things that you can import with no issue into Wild Apricot, as well as things that you don't need to prepare in advance for. Custom data like first name, last name, email, or any address information can come into the system with no issue, as well as things like membership join, renewal, and expiry dates. You'll also be able to create custom membership levels and import people into those levels. Likewise, you can import people into an existing membership status. You'll also be able to import privacy preferences and import people directly into member groups if you have them. Finally, you'll absolutely be able to import any custom fields that you have which aren't in Wild Apricot yet. Those sorts of things can be created as common fields or membership fields. And lastly, internal notes can come in, no problem. There are, however, a few things that you cannot import into Wild Apricot properly, namely historic payments that may have been made by a member to your organization, or invoices or emails that they have got in the past. They don't fit perfectly in Wild Apricot without being recreated on a one-to-one basis, so it's best to think of this as a going forward solution. Likewise, you aren't able to import somebody's avatar or photo. You'll have to create that manually as an administrator or have your member do it themselves if you do want them to have a photo field. Lastly, you won't be able to import old credit card information for your users. They'll have to reauthorize billing and complete a new payment. It can be made a recurring payment, but the first one will have to be authorized by the member. As we wrap up Lesson 1, if you want more help on any of these topics, always feel very welcome to visit our help site, which is located at gethelp.wildapricot.com. There you'll find hundreds of articles with examples and videos about how to achieve the tasks you're looking to do in Wild Apricot. But if you want any extra help, to get in touch with the coaches, please feel very welcome to reach out at coaches@wildapricot.com. Myself and the rest of the team are very happy to help, so if there's anything we can do, just let us know. And if there's any other information you require, just visit wildapricot.com. On a personal note, thanks so much for getting through Lesson 1, and I can't wait to see you at the rest of the boot camp. Have a great day. Coach Mark, signing off.